I've had a couple of requests to talk about guitars. I talked about a 335 style a little while ago, and that was sort of fun. And so I thought I'd dig in a little bit to the Les Paul style guitars and what makes them what they are. And I just went down a wormhole with this one because it's like studying, the sociology of the latter half of the 20th century. But that's cool. So I'm just going to touch on not only the Les Paul guitar, but Les Paul himself. So back to the 1940s. In the 1940s, electric guitars, sort of looked like this. They were more or less archtop guitars. There's so many interesting stories about that period from the 40s moving into the 50s. Rock and roll, for instance, was just in its root stages, and all the guys that were getting called in to do recording sessions were playing guitars like this. They were sort of like what we look at now as sort of a jazz box, right? But they were all coming from the swing era, and so they were just sort of making up what they thought rock and roll should sound like, and they played guitars like this, F-hole, archtop type guitars for the most part. But there was a drawback with playing that kind of guitar, and that was feedback, because the volumes that were starting to happen, not only in the recording sessions, but in the live dates as well, the volumes were much higher, and guitar players used to have to play now rather than in an entire swing band. They were playing in smaller groups like, quartets and so on. So they had to get pretty loud, and the trouble with the F-holes was they would feedback like crazy. And so along came Les Paul. And Les Paul was, here's a picture of Les Paul. And I just put some stuff here. Les Paul is the most important individual in the history of modern music industry, in the history of the industry of modern music. His influence is profound, having been a pioneer in the development of the solid body electric guitar, as well as numerous recording techniques, including multi-track recording, digital delay, and reverb. All of these things, obviously, multi-track recording especially, that is our modern record industry, if there is one left. And the plugins or effects that we use, digital delay, reverb, and so on, compression. These are all instrumental to giving us the sound that we have now in the modern recording studio format. He created the first playable solid body electric guitar using a solid 4x4 piece of wood, 4x4, like I've put in posts for a fence that are 4x4s, just to give you an idea. And he affectionately dubbed this the log, and what this log had on it was a pickup. Now I'm just trying to make this as practical as possible for all of you out there. If you're out guitar hunting or considering, maybe picking up a different instrument, I would like to just demonstrate in this video. This isn't a log, but it's a pallet.
It's a pallet.
All right, so I would say that sort of proves that the electric guitar is very largely made up of a hunk of wood and pickups. And so, the idea that if you're hunting for a guitar, you want a maple body or you want a mahogany body or whatever the case is, really, man, if you can demonstrate to me that matters, let me know. But what matters more and what matters most is the pickup. So Les Paul created the first playable solid body electric guitar, and this in turn led to the Les Paul guitar. This is a Les Paul style guitar. We'll get into more of that later. And Gibson thought that was pretty cool. He pitched it to the Gibson Guitar Company, the same people that were making, like F-hole acoustics and sort of jazz boxes. And he in this rock and roll era, that was just this fledgling rock and roll era, he pitched this idea of the electric solid body guitar, which didn't feed back. A big deal at that time. And there was obviously a huge emerging market at that time as well. So a lot of this is just so I can remember all the stuff I've been going through. You don't have to read it. So Les Paul and Mary Ford did some recordings back in the early 1950s. This was, and it says in this piece that I gleaned from, I think it was Les Paul's website, actually. So the recordings that they did were effects enhanced chart hits. Now, effects enhanced is the important one there, because keep in mind that he was instrumental in creating the multi-track recording studio. And so they were the first multi-track recordings that were used in what you could call modern popular music at that time. If you can have a listen to How High the Moon, recorded in 1951, Mary Ford sang it, and Les Paul recorded the parts. And he did it with multi-tracking. Now, I just wanted to remind myself of this story. The great Canadian guitarist, the great Lenny Breau, told this wonderful story of how he heard the first Les Paul recording. And he nearly had a breakdown because he was convinced that he could be or was the best guitar player in the world. Lenny was convinced. And I was almost convinced too on several occasions. You've got to listen to Lenny Breau to appreciate his awesome talent. And so he heard Les Paul on I think it was the How High the Moon recording with Mary Ford. And he almost gave up playing guitar because he couldn't do that. He had no idea how Les Paul could play that quickly and play that amazingly on a recording. And what poor Lenny didn't know is that Les Paul was multi-tracking. And I think at that point he had a four-track situation set up on discs. So poor Lenny was pretty depressed, but that didn't prevent him from learning it anyway, which I find to be pretty amazing. Yeah. All right, so the Les Paul design is ultimately a solid piece of wood with pickups. And the pickups are essentially, as you can see here, as you all know already, pickups are just simple microphones. And this design allowed for the high volume playing and amplifier distortion of the rock of the 1960s. Now, this becomes a huge deal now all of a sudden, where the Les Paul guitar starts to be the bedrock of this whole new rock and roll sound. And yes, Strats are around too, but we're focusing on the Les Paul right now. And so the fact that they could avoid feedback, right, meant that they could play louder, which I've already discussed. But it also meant that the amplifiers that they were using during that period were just not cutting it, like the single 12-inch tube amp that you could play in a Saturday night dance date was not cutting it for audiences of 5,000 people. And so manufacturers like Marshall and Hiwatt came along, and the Les Paul combined with those amplifiers all of a sudden provided this sound that was like, the heavens were descending. And as you can hear with recordings like Crossroads with Eric Clapton, or speaking of amplifiers now, because Hendrix wasn't using a Les Paul, or Hendrix's stuff, with a stack of Marshalls. So all of a sudden, this became the rock and roll sound of that period, and went through to the 70s, and eventually all sorts of other stuff happened with controlling the distortion, controlling the sustain. Okay. So that's a little bit of a background as far as the Les Paul guitar goes. The Les Paul guitar is a hunk of wood with pickups, and obviously a neck. So it doesn't suffer the same focus that constructing, for instance, a classical guitar would, or constructing even an F-top, F-hole jazz box, or acoustic dreadnought. This type of guitar is essentially a block of wood with a neck and pickups. And that would, as demonstrated by the guy playing a palette, or as demonstrated by Les Paul pitching a 4x4. That's too priceless. Pitching a 4x4 with a pickup on it to Gibson is, it tells the story right there. So what I want to get to, and what I want to make more practical in this video, is what does that mean to you? Like, it's sort of a fun story in terms of the history of this instrument, and how it obviously affected all of the popular music that we listen to and have listened to for the last 60 or 70 years, which is sort of a mind blower. But it also affects choices that we're in our culture, we're very brand conscious, right? And what I mean by brand conscious is, well, if it's not a Gibson, then it's probably not good, or if it's not a Epiphone or whatever, if it's not that brand name, it couldn't be as good as these other copies could not possibly be as good as a Gibson or name brand, right? And I'm just going to make the case that is not necessarily so. Now, the guitar that I have in my lap here, this is, some people would say, like back in the 60s and 70s, they were starting to knock off Gibsons, right? And there were the lawsuit guitars and stuff like that. Some of them were terrible. And that still holds true for today. Some of the knockoff brands are poorly constructed. They don't feel nice, and but others are quite amazing. So how can you separate one from the other? So I'm just going to dig into my guitar, one of my guitars, that I happen to like a whole bunch. So keeping in mind that a Gibson guitar, the original Gibson Les Paul, was just a hunk of wood with pickups. Then what happens with that logic is that as long as you have a well-constructed instrument that intonates properly, that plays in tune up and down the fretboard, and is aesthetically pleasing to you, it stays in tune, it plays, and so on. Then the next probably the most important thing, is the pickups, right? And in this case here, I'm just gonna take a look at this one document that I just did that talks about pickups a little bit. If I can get to it here, and there we go. So here is a single coil pickup, a typical single coil pickup, which you would find in a Strat, right? And single coil pickups are usually brighter than a humbucker. These are humbuckers, right? And usually they need a 250K volume pot. I don't want to get into all that stuff due to their brightness. And there's a lot less output in a single Strat pickup. So you've seen Stratocaster guitars, you've seen the 3 pickup configuration, 3 single coils. One of the problems has always been that has always existed with single coil pickups is that they're noisy. And especially when you're in a single pickup position on the 5-position switch. I'll do a Strat later. I've got, some here. No, just one right now. And then a humbucker is a double, essentially a double coil that's wound one way on the one coil and wound the other way on the other coil, as you can see here, I think, yeah. And that's what I have here. I have humbuckers. So humbuckers tend to be a lot darker than a single coil pickup. They usually need a 500K pot, and they're more powerful than single coil pickups. That means that they've just got sort of more oomph. I'm not going to start demonstrating that stuff because it's meaningless. Because if you're maybe listening through your phone, I don't know, right? But they're just warmer, fatter, bigger sounding pickups, and you would usually find a humbucker on jazz type guitars, because jazz guitars require that warmth, and you will find them on the Les Paul body style, right? Okay, so these pickups here, when I bought this guitar, it had nice pickups. But an option you always have with pickups is you have the option of replacing them, and in this case, I sort of spent the big bucks and I bought these humbuckers here, which are Joe Barden pickups. They're probably a hand wound humbucker, sort of a high end humbucker, and they're just they just kill. I did this television show with these pickups, recording mostly with this guitar, and it was really quite astounding, the difference between a very good pickup and a crazy good pickup like this. And so you've always got that option to replace crazy good pickups. As far as this guitar goes, generally speaking, I love the way it feels. I don't mind the way it looks. It's got a maple. A nice maple flame top, and so on the aesthetic side of things, it's sort of cool. So I think I'll go. There's a picture of Les Paul. Sorry, I missed that one. In an Ampex built studio in 1956 with the 8-track Ampex. And a console that they designed as well. This is at the very, very opening stages of multi-track recording. Okay, so getting back to the guitar. So obviously this guitar is not made in America, and so I want to address that a little bit. Before I do, let's just talk about the neck a little bit. This style of neck here is a one-piece maple neck with a scarf joint. You can see this joining where the maple headstock attaches to the neck just behind the frets. The separate headstock allows for a much stronger neck. That's what this guitar is. That's the way it looks on the other side. That's nice. Here's another option for a neck: is a three-piece neck with a hardwood piece down the center of the neck. Also a nice style of neck, and it does also have that scarfing here, as you can see, I think in the picture. And then a bolt-on neck. Bolt-on necks are generally cheaper to manufacture and keeps the cost of the guitar down a little bit. Easier to repair damaged necks, and really, really easy. You just unbolt the neck and you can throw on a new neck, right? You can swap necks. The cons may feel uncomfortable or limit access to the upper frets, and tends to make a guitar look cheap compared to other neck joints. I wouldn't. I've never noticed that. But one thing I have noticed, I have a strap with a telly with a bolt on, and up when I get to the top, it sort of bothers me. That bothers me a little bit. And but other than that, the way they're constructed nowadays, and if it's a good neck that's solidly constructed, you're not going to have to worry about warping or anything else. And as it says here, there are advantages to the bolt-on. Then there are set necks, this is a typical Gibson set neck. And to have more sustain and take longer these guitars they say they have more sustain. It's sort of a dovetail joint into the pocket of the guitar, and dovetail between neck and body. And set necks are glued in via that dovetail joint in the electric guitar body. So you'll have a slab of wood, and the luthier will cut the dovetail and then glue it and clamp it and so on. I really, that's what this guitar is. It's that set neck style, that Les Paul set neck style. And then the other one is a neck through, and I just grabbed a picture off the net of a neck through idea, where you literally take the wings of the body and set them into the neck, and the neck travels all the way through the body. This is not a bolt-on neck; it's a set neck. And so I like a set neck. I've got pickups that I like here. The pots are nice and clean. They're actually set in. It's got Grover heads on it. It's got a bone nut. It's got this single tail piece made by Wilkinson. Nice long throw, easy to intonate. And other sort of cool little things too, like the cutaway is scalloped, right, which feels really good when you get away to the top, and it's got that nice little carved belly, right. I like all this stuff. Nice binding all the way up and down the neck, and so that's all pretty good. Now I just want to go back to what I was saying about marketing. And this is a big deal. We've owned a music store and don't anymore. And so during that time, I got a very close look at how guitar retail and wholesale worked. Music instrument retail and wholesale. So back in the 60s, and 70s, of course, as well. Some of the brands that they were manufacturing in Japan were Aria, Ibanez, Sigma, Takamine, or Takamine, some people say, Suzuki, and a whack more, right? There were just a whole whack of Japanese guitar brands at that time. And they were building some nice stuff. They built beautiful classical guitars like Matsuoka and Kono and others. They're expert builders. Like, one thing about the Japanese, when they take something on, they don't fool around. But what ended up happening as time went on is Japanese guitars were a little more expensive than some people wanted to pay. And so along came Korea. This is the short version. And Korea started manufacturing some of the guitars that Japan was previously manufacturing, like Ibanez being one of them. Aria would float around and try this factory, try that factory. Now, which brings me to when you're buying in the market for a guitar, if you can go like this with brand names and just feel the instrument, feel the weight of the instrument, check out all of the different components of the instrument, make sure that they're quality components, make sure the instrument plays in tune. If you don't like the pickups, change them, right? But nowadays, it's a bit of a trick to justify, 3, 4, 5 grand. With F-hole jazz boxes, we're now talking in the neighborhood of 10 and 20 grand, right? So factories started moving from production started moving from Japan to South Korea. And some of the South Korea brands are Samick, Peerless, Court, Crafter, Ibanez again, because it floats around a bit, Gretsch again. And so these are Asian guitars. Okay, now about South Korea, there are some absolutely excellent factories in South Korea, excellent builders, and two I know for sure from personal experience is the Peerless factory and the Crafter factory. Crafter factory is actually owned by a family. And they're not hand-built guitars. I don't know where you can get hand-built guitars anymore other than, finding a luthier and getting him to build you one. But they're beautifully crafted, and there's lots of attention to detail. I own a Crafter acoustic, and as a matter of fact, I used to carry the line, and it was an impressive medium range line. Peerless, on the other hand, is not so much a medium range line. It was building really beautiful jazz boxes, and now they've moved to building solid bodies and 335 styles and a whole bunch of other stuff with the Peerless logo. And the reason they're using the Peerless logo now is because that same company used to build for Gretsch, used to build for Ibanez, used to build for Epiphone, and so on. And they lost their contracts to China. And China started getting into the game of building guitars, and they undercut everybody. And as we know, it seems that, well, at least a few years ago, it seemed that every single week there was another Chinese guitar brand. I would strongly suggest that, there's so much in the way. I can't say get a Peerless guitar or get a guitar built in by by Crafter or get a Japanese made Aria Pro 2 from the whatever. That I'm not saying anything like that. What I'm saying is I think that the most important thing is for you to find a guitar that's speaking to you somehow. And every guitar is going to have its weak points, like slightly weak points. If those weak points have to do with, ouch, the frets are sharp, put the thing down and go away, right? If it's more like, gee, these pickups aren't quite hot enough for me, but man, does this guitar ever feel great? Swap out the pickups, man. There are so many great pickups out there and great pickup manufacturers that you can just draw anything out of a solid piece of wood that's playing in tune. And remember, that's what this is. A solid body is just a solid hunk of 4x4. Well, maybe not 4x4 anymore. As you can see, there's a wonderful history behind the Les Paul guitar, behind the solid body guitars in general. That speaks to the second half of the 20th century in such a big way in terms of the impact that it had on the sounds that were taking place at that time. The sustain and the big fat gigantic overall depth of a guitar that's plugged into an Orange or a High Watt or a Marshall. Those were good times. And they changed the way the guitar was played. It was no longer a jazz box, being played with that kind of thing. All of a sudden, the single note lines, could cover an entire 10,000 person auditorium, right? And that was monumental. It was revolutionary. So thank you, Les Paul, for those really, really great ideas. And I would really strongly suggest that you listen to Les Paul and Mary Ford, and you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. It's so cool. It's really, you can very clearly hear it's the beginning of multi-track recording, and he used it to great effect for a number of hits. Not just How High the Moon, but The World is Waiting for the Sunrise, Mockingbird Hill, Tiger Rag, Bye Bye Blues, Via con Dios. Like, these were all number one hits in America at that time. And, so he made very good use of his innovations in multi-track recording, which were eventually picked up by the Ampex Corporation and others. It wasn't too far along when George Martin and the Beatles were using that technology to turn out albums like Magical Mystery Tour and Strawberry Fields. Okay, well, that's about it. I could go on and on and on. You probably left by now anyway. But okay, so that's about it. Lots of great guitars out there, and don't get turned off by brand names. Find one that speaks to you, and that's talking to you. And thanks for sticking around, and I hope you learned something. See you soon.